Well, coming from you live from the Cameron Cetus podcast studios, this is The Point After on the Oklahoma Sports Network. My name is Eric Sherem. Glad to have you along as we're kind of just trucking along with high school sports, and we're so glad to have had the summer behind us. We started with the fall sports with some of the girls sports that we've been talking about, volleyball and softball, and we are full into the football season. We can finally get 0 week behind us, a couple of weeks in, and actually some teams are actually starting their bye weeks this week. This is kind of a strange thing, but that is Oklahoma football for now. I mean, when you added a 0 week and you added a whole bunch of new opponents to new calendars for the teams that had to make adjustments, then that's what you get. So we've got a special in-studio guest with me today, and we're going to invite Chris Evans from the Guthrie News Page, from the Guthrie News, and we want to be able to talk a little bit of high school sports. And you and I, over the last couple of years, have kind of work together a little bit along the way, because you are, and I got to say, lights, a head and shoulders above when it comes to putting on great productions, and you are have been contracted through the OSSAA and the NFHS to do all of the finals. And what a thrill it's been for the last couple of years with the games that you've seen. And we can talk a little bit about that, but then talk about this year too, that we're going to talk about all of the finals are going to be held in football at one location. And that's something new. And so that means it drives all the fans at one location, and it makes it easier for you for setup for broadcasting to get that out. But are you excited to get the season started? I know you follow Guthrie, but you're also a high school football fan.
Yeah, no doubt. And you were talking about week 0, and it's hard to keep all the weeks straight. It's week 2 of the high school football season, or week 3 of the high school football season, but some teams have played 2 games, some teams have played 3. It's hard to keep up with exactly what week it is because it doesn't match up. But it's finally here. It's fun. We got, I think, another week. I think this is week 3, another week of non-district football before we can get into the district football part of the schedule. As you mentioned, 3 new classes this year added in, so 12 football state championships to be played in the 2 weeks in December at Chad Richardson Stadium. So it is a busy but fun time of the year.
Well, I wanted to get your opinion on a couple of things first off, and I want to talk about we won't really go into as far as all the districts. Check a little bit first. I'm very appreciative of the fact that the OSSAA saw a need for a change, and the way I looked at it years ago when I was covering Lawton High for 6A, and you had to play the Jinx and the Unions, and there was a lot of conversation from the locals, from any community that said, well, it's really not fair. We're our little school that we've got, 3 high schools in one town have to take on these big powerhouses. And so if I was part of the OSSAA, I would say, I don't know how you really solve that because you can't come in and force a Bixby, a Jinx, a Broken Arrow, and you say, hey, why don't you guys just separate and have 3 programs so everybody can have an equal playing field with you, and it wouldn't be fair. And I heard it suggested even in the Southwest Oklahoma region where I cover, well, why don't we just combine all of our 3 high schools and have one program? Well, then you get rid of tradition, you get rid of the history, and the school has to just do that to compete. I wasn't a fan of that either. So you were at a crossroads forever until several years ago, and you can correct me on how long that's been now that we've had the separation of 6A1 and 6A2, and now you develop another state champion out of it. But now, and I want to get your take on it, the lower classes, starting with 2A, has done the 2A1 and 2A2 because they were so full with so many classes, and their state championship was always a week after everybody else finished because they had extra teams. So what is your thoughts about now getting into the 2A realm and those lower classes to divide into 2 different kind of districts?
Yeah, well, the OSSA has a difficult job. They have over 400 member schools that they got to try make. It's not going to happen to make everybody that happy with that many schools. But it has now been 10 years since 6A1 and 6A2 were split off. And it's, I think that was a great decision. At first, I think we're kind of having that decision. Do we like it? Do we not like it for B8 or B1, B2, A1, A2? and now 2A1, 2A2. I think it's the same discussion we had at 6A. I don't think a lot of people liked it at the beginning, but I think it was a great decision for those schools to do that, or for the OSA to do that, simply because your Sapulpas, your Bartlesvilles, your Ponca Cities, Pump City West, schools like that never had a chance to compete against the Union and the Jinx and now the Bixby's, Broken Arrows. It was just a huge disadvantage. And so I couldn't imagine being at those schools and going through 2 days in the hot, knowing the best that we can do is get a playoff spot and then have to go to Jinx or Union for round 1 of the playoffs. I just could not imagine that scenario there. So I think it's been a great to split that. And then you talk about, there's 3 Edmond schools, 2 Norman schools, 3 Lawton schools, 3 Pump City schools. And when Bixby and Jinx and Union want to do something to the football field, they have all those resources to go into that one football field. Well, if you're going to do that at Norman, you got to split it 2 ways. If you do that at Edmond, you got to do that 3 different ways. So the money is split into 3 different ways instead of one big area. Now, Mustang and Yukon on this side of the state are one of the 2 largest on the west side, and they have the capability of doing that. We'll see what happens there. So is it best to split into 3, or is it best to keep 1? I guess that's up to each district to decide that. But as far as splitting the 3 classes, the lower classes this year, I'm still trying to learn who's who and what in each of those classes. So I'm a little trying to figure out who's in 2A1 and who's in 2A2. I'm still not very comfortable with it, but that's what the coaches wanted, and the OSSAA does a pretty good job of listening to the member schools, and they basically give it to the OSA, hey, we want to do this. And so if that's what the coaches want, then we'll see how it works out. But I guess I'm just not used to who's in 2A1, 2A2. As soon as I maybe learn that, it might be a good thing. But the one thing that probably makes the OSSA a little bit nervous is not having the 3 extra state championship games, but having the extra state semifinal games. Because, for example, if Choctaw is playing in a state semifinal game or a state championship game, everybody in Choctaw is going to be at that football game. Well, we need a neutral site on a turf field, more than likely at a 6A, 5A, 4A type school for those small schools. Well, Choctaw people are at the game. You got to have concession stand workers, you got to have gatekeepers. So it would be hard for those schools to host. So that's the one thing that might be the most difficult thing for the OSSAA, but they always find a way every single year. So I'm sure it'll be no problem this year.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this probably because I'm going to have you on a guest too when we get close to basketball. But basketball is going to be the same way, where they were split in the 5A, 6A. We're playing in Norman for the last couple of years. They played in Tulsa before that, and now it's all going to be at the Big House. So the same kind of situation is kind of setting up those little areas for, okay, do facilities A, can they host? B, do they have staffing to be able to host because they're in the town that you want? So, but I think the argument for me has always been the ADM, because I said if size matters, and it does, as far as class, your size for the ADM, then they should be accordingly, and so it was kind of hard on 6A because it was very obvious that the top end was up into the 3,000, 4,000, or 5,000 in attendance, as opposed to the low end that was only 1,500. And, you say, well, if ADM doesn't matter, then we'll just play regionally of schools that are around us, and then you'll beat up on the really small schools that way. And so, of course, that wasn't a solution. So I think this was the best, and how they work it out with the smaller ones, I think it was very unique because there was a lot of changes this year. In fact, we can talk a little bit about that from the OSN side, as far as after the legal ramifications with the OSSAA had to deal with the private schools, kind of offset some things. And I know last spring everybody already had their calendar, they already had their scheduled teams. And then midsummer, and I got to hand it to all the coaches, and they're used to adversity and change. And okay, this is not working out scheduling wise. They had to start over from scratch. Some of them, now some of them were just solidified in where they were. But for our 12 schools that we have covered, we saw a lot of change. The most change I've ever seen in the 9 years we've covered high school sports. starting with, and I'll go on the west side, Altus just changes districts. So what I was very familiar with MacArthur playing like an Altus is now going to play where you reside over in Guthrie. Okay, and then in Lawton, you had two changes out of the three schools. So you had Lawton High drop from 6A to 5A, and then you had Eisenhower go from 5A to 6A2, and then Lawton High had to go somewhere, so they weren't going to sandwich those into where MacArthur was, so they sent that over to the Carl Albert Guthrie, that side of that district too. And then you had Newcastle that was preparing a couple of years down the road from going to 4A to 5A. Now, hello, welcome to 5A. And then Elgin, who had just been placed into 5A for the last 2 years, drops down because of that tie with Bishop McGuinness. They go back down to 4A. And so outside of Walters, I think, and Carl Albert, Del City stayed over there in the east, and Midwest City stayed where they were. But that was a shakeup, and hats off to all of the programs that kind of put it together so they could kind of get a season kicked off.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. The other part of that deal is a lot of schools couldn't find those teams to play. So you see a lot of this, especially the 6A schools, going over to Texas and Arkansas having to play. I think some of your schools had to go to Texas as well. But yeah, a little bit switch. Look at 5A1. McGuinness is over back in 5A1 for the first time since 1997, I believe. And then in 5A2, Guthrie and Carl Albert are the only two teams that stayed. Everybody's new to the district. When you look at Noble, Altus, Lawton, Western Heights, those are new. And then 5A4, Booker T. Washington, another team that was in 6A2, make their way down to Class 5A as well. And that's just one class. That's 5A, 6A2. There was, a little bit, Southmore goes from 6A1 to 6A2, which was great timing for them because they've been 0-10, 1-9 over the last couple of years. But now 6A2, they've already won a couple of games. Heck, they already beat their one of their rivals in Westmore. So I think Southmore moving down to 6A2, kind of go back to what our previous topic was. I think it gives them a lot of motivation and a lot of positive reinforcement that, hey, we're now in 6A2. Let's go out and compete and win games. And heck, they beat their friends from Westmore.
Yeah, I saw that. We're going to talk about some of the upsets starting off this new week. But, I think 6A2 and, just an observer on the outside in the last couple of years since Bixby had moved up to 6A1 is just really wide open. And that showed with the state titles, Stillwater just a couple of years ago, and then Muskogee last year. And now it's just kind of saying, okay, well, it's an open market. There's no stamina of, okay, you have the typical names that we say in a class. And one thing I was going to say with you, with your district is so changed. We are creatures of habit. And I'll tell you what, it's so used to, I see the district, okay, now where am I going? Am I going there or are they coming us? Because we already know the familiarity of the same Altus and Duncan and Ardmore. I could just name them off. And then before the season, you could say, okay, well, it's probably a 4-way tie for these 4 teams that are going to come down to 1 through 4. And then the rest have to kind of do that fight for that 4th position. What does that do for you guys just for brand the newness of kind of looking at new opponents?
Well, we've always saw Lawton High had a great run there for a couple of years in the semis and state championships. So it's going to be first time to ever see Lawton play them. We've seen Lawton MacArthur. We go to Lawton seems like every year to play Lawton MacArthur. You guys finally came to Guthrie last year for the first time ever. I was like, we got to get a return trip every now and then, Eric. Come on, it's only fair. But yeah, Guthrie has had games with El Reno in the past and Western Heights in the past. I've only been to Altus one time. We're making that trip on October 25th, I think it is. And that was a playoff game. That was in the year that Altus had won state championship. I think it was 2014. We were there. It's called the Rock. Guthrie plays at the Rock as well, so it's the Rock and Rock. So we'll be making a trip there here in a little bit. So really, for me, the new district will bring in Altus and Lawton, 2 schools that haven't seen a lot. And you know what? I kind of like that. It's not, you got the same teams year in, year out that you see all the time. So it's going to be neat to see Lawton and Altus. And I got to tell you, sidetrack real quick. The 3 Lawton schools, they have 3 tremendous coaches right now. I couldn't be more excited. Coach Harris, I think he's bringing a new energy there. Coach Lorenzo at Lawton, coach of the year last year. And that I don't know what happened, but he was done wrong. But now he's at Coach Lawton, and then Coach Manning, taking over for his dad. They haven't skipped a beat there in Lawton. So great coaches there in Lawton. That's one of the good things with our class 5A1, 5A2 crossover. I've really gotten to meet those guys and watch them through a lot of Oklahoma Sports Network stuff. And you got 3 great coaches down in the Lawton area.
Well, and I think, yeah, and you add that with a great talent mix, and I don't know. I mean, don't you get a thrill to watch these kids grow, and especially if they go to the next level? I don't care if it's Division I or Division II, and then if you get fortunate enough to watch them actually go in the pros, and then you can reflect back on your career and you go, you know what, I saw them then. I saw them when, they were a sophomore and no one really knew much about them. And then you saw their growth from it. So I think that's a part of the fun for us, is to cover these athletes that put on a show for us each and every Friday. And then some of them just are just exceedingly talented that takes them to another level.
Yeah, it's great when you watch ESPN and Fox broadcasts when they say Javon Harris for the Sooners makes a tackle, played over at Lawton Mac. It's cool to hear those names. Guthrie's had one kid that played at Guthrie, Control Brothers, played at Missouri, led the SEC in tackles, and then had 4 or 5 years at the Minnesota Vikings. But to see and hear Guthrie, Oklahoma, or your hometown, it's not just Guthrie, but when I hear Bixby or Bishop McGuinness, on the big stage of college football, it's always fun to watch them. And the recruiting process, I don't get real deep into the recruiting deal, but it's also neat to hear like Grady Assen at Deer Creek going to this school with all these offers from the other schools. So it is cool to watch these guys. I mean, JT Remoto at Carl Albert, one of the best athletes I've ever seen in high school. And for him to be at the major leagues and what he does, zero surprise. But it's still cool to see Midwest City, Oklahoma, during a Phillies-Dodgers game on Fox TV.
Yeah, I mean, it's and it's a sense of pride, and for those who and you follow Oklahoma sports, of course, doing all the finals, you get to see the best of the best at the end of the year. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about football. As far as before we get down any specific districts, we've had a couple of weeks of football in, and now that you're my guest, I'm going to say, because there has been some surprises. Let's talk about that. What has surprised you as we start this 2024 season?
Couple surprises in 6A football. Owasso not only winning, but winning convincingly over Bixby and Jinx in back-to-back weeks. And then the other one was Stillwater beating Tulsa Union a couple weeks ago. Now, Stillwater has to rally late to hold on. I moved them above Muskogee from the #1 ranking. I was kind of out on a limb by myself, and I thought, well, here they're getting ready to get upset this past week, but they were able to hold on. But those were probably the main upsets there. I think when you look at 5A, nothing too crazy. Carl Albert, Collinsville, I think are maybe the top 2 teams in that class there. I tell you, 4A is going to be really fun to watch this year with Weatherford, Elgin, and Tuttle. I think Weatherford's a good team too, but I think Wagner and Elgin are the top 2. And there's an argument who's the best right now, which really doesn't matter. It's just kind of a conversation to have. But Elgin has a great offensive line. They have a quarterback that manages the system well. They have Ritson Meyer, who's replacing Matthew Lund, who's the all-time leading rusher at Elgin High School. So when you have the all-time rushing leader leave, it's good to have somebody like Ritson Meyer to come in and cover that up. You have the Division I talent for Elgin at left tackle that's going to Tennessee. Makes perfect sense because he looks like Division I type kid. So 4A is going to be fun. Tuttle just below those schools there. But, it's then 3A, Lincoln Christian, they're always near the top. Heritage Hall is always near the top. We'll see if, Sulphur can come through in that tough class of 3A. But, there's been a lot of games back and forth. We pick games every week on our little show, and I'm absolutely horrendous right now. So I couldn't tell you what's going to happen week to week, which is kind of fun. That's the good part about high school football.
Yeah, you can't tell me your personal record. How have you done so far?
I don't even want to look at it anymore. That's tomorrow's assignment, but it's not good. It's not good.
Well, okay. A pre-prediction before you get into yours and you do it. I thought it was interesting because you mentioned both of them, but Carl Albert goes to Stillwater for a non-district matchup on Friday. Who you got in that one?
Well, Stillwater can obviously win that game. They've already beat Union, who has obviously a very good team. I think they might have the best quarterback in the state in Shaker Reisig. I cut a lot of flack across the state because I picked Collinsville to win the Class 5A state championship. So since I picked Collinsville, I know, but if it comes true, I'm going to be I have to be on everybody's podcast that week. So I
talked about how bad of a record you had going into this, so it won't even go back to how you started out the season, but it's how you finish, though, right?
Yeah, I apologize now to Collinsville. I ruined your entire season right now the way my picks have gone right now. But I'm gonna go with the 5A. I'm gonna go with Carl Albert Titans.
Oh, you're gonna go with Carl Albert.
Go with Carl Albert. The thing with Carl Albert and Del City, who have Carl Albert 1 and Del City number 3, is their quarterbacks. They had 2 great quarterbacks last year, and it's hard to replace those type of guys. In fact, I don't know if you can. You have to come down a notch or 2, replacing Kevin Sperry and River Warren there a little bit. I just don't know how they're going to throw the ball. I'm sure they'll throw the ball well, but both with new quarterbacks this year, and we'll see how they know. Collinsville has a great quarterback, great running back, a very good wide receiver as well. But we'll see how that comes into playoffs. But I'm just kind of trying to figure out how the quarterback spot was, because that's the most important. In Class 5A football, there's not a whole lot of passing. And I think if you can pass the football, you have a great chance of winning, like we saw last year between Sperry and River Warren. I think Collinsville probably throws the ball the best in 5A football. Lott MacArthur does a great job as well throwing the football, especially the deep ball. So we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. But I like the Titans on the road in Stillwater.
Okay, a very interesting matchup there. One thing I want to go back to a quick second, because you mentioned Elgin and you mentioned Ritzenmeyer, and I remember, because he's just a junior, and when he was a sophomore and he was behind Lund, and I saw him come in to spell Lund, and I would say, there's no drop off to this young man. And I was able to see them in 0 week against MacArthur, and he just had a field day, with this rushing. And so I was getting to the 3rd and 4th quarter, and I didn't know his backdrop with other sports, but, on my broadcast, I got a text from someone that says, well, he was a 2-time state, wrestling champion. In fact, trying to go for 3. And in fact, I was talking to a good wrestling contact recently that said he should go 4. I mean, unless there's one more in there that could give him some struggle in the end. But that is saying something. And so now when you're toting the rock for 4 quarters and you're this as tough as nails wrestling champion, I can see why. So I like when they kind of go across these different sports. And Lawton High is kind of different, unique too, because Coach Lorenzo Williams, who you mentioned, has able to recruit a lot of basketball players that had not played football, and he kind of joked that it's basketball on grass, because he's trying to get all these kids some looks and because they got talent, and he's trying to figure that out. And I know that's what a non-district schedule is. So don't judge Lawton High just by their record. A coach that comes in brand new, recruiting the hallways, getting kids out, believing in the system, and you give him a little bit of time and he'll be fine. But so it's kind of unique that, when you mentioned that 4A realm, and I got to go back to my Cushing Wagner story that was a couple of years ago, that when they were in the finals, Cushing had beat them in the regular season and pretty much by a couple of touchdowns. And I sensed that going into the state finals. I could see and Cushing was the home side and Wagner was the away side. And the only reason I know this storyline is I was helping some videography on the sidelines. And we kind of split it up. And I said, well, you go over there because, if this team looks like they're going to win, you can get that. And I'll get Wagner's side of it. They're telling their side of the story. And Wagner, very similar to, like a Carl Albert story of, okay, they're very familiar. They've been here a time or two. They're very experienced. They don't get rattled much. And they kept it close. And then they got a turnover. And I never saw panic on their sidelines. And then all of a sudden, boom, it switched and they were hoisting the trophy at the end of the night. So, you can have those things. So I'm really anxious to see what 4A, because it's a very physical, kind of montage of, even with Blanchard in there, Blanchard, Tuttle, Wagner, if you throw Clinton from years back, and then you have Elgin now in that mix, it's going to make for a very interesting final run. And all those ones that we mentioned, if they don't make the semifinals for each of them, it will be a disappointing year. So the expectations are they're going to be there. And then when you get to the Final Four, well, it's whoever can get some good breaks in that final stretch.
Yeah, in Class 4A, you look at 4A and all sports, all level across, it's one of the most competitive classes there are. I know football, basketball, and baseball for sure are really well balanced with great programs in all those sports. And just to kind of go backwards just a little bit, you mentioned Ritz and Meyer for Elgin. He's also an outstanding baseball player. That might be his on the next level. He might be a baseball player on the D1 level, and the quarterback's a great third baseman over there as well for Elgin. But yeah, Elgin, if they were in 5A, they would be near the top in 5A, and now they're down near the top in Class 4A. You mentioned Clinton, the defending 4A state champions. I'll get to see them firsthand this week. Guthrie makes a trip over to Clinton. Coach Jeff Craig, outstanding. I mean, he has won everywhere he has gone, including last year's state championship. A kind of bit of a surprise victory over Wagner. I'm sure you ask the people in Whiteshire, they're not too surprised, but maybe that'll happen this year. Collinsville surprises Carl Albert, maybe, if that were to happen. But yeah, 4A and Weatherford, they got an outstanding defensive end, tight end, basketball player headed to the University of Oklahoma. So yeah, it's a fun class. I really enjoy watching 4A. Time to time, Cushing, like you mentioned a couple of years ago, kind of came out of nowhere. They had not out of nowhere. They had a couple of good years, but really made a really deep run all the way to the finals. But yeah, 4A is exciting this year, and as they all are. But 4A, it just seems to be the class every year. Look at the Big House. You were there for Weatherford and Douglas in the 4A basketball state championship. There wasn't a seat to be found there. That was the marquee game of the entire state basketball tournament.
Yeah, and since you mentioned basketball, we'll mention this. I know that we all want stuff done like yesterday, and we want that new facility up at the Big House. And when you drive by from the interstate, you can see it. Oh, wow, it's really looking good, but it is not going to be ready this year. And you're kind of, okay, I'm going to get a little sad and a little frown because we always want the new bill and the new whistles. But we talked about this in the very beginning of the broadcast, that not only of all the state finals for football are going to be under one location, now basketball will follow suit, and that's just going to make your schedule a little bit more challenging there in March when you're doing that for the NFHS network. But what do you think about that, of having all of the state championship basketball games under one roof?
I think it's going to be awesome. When all the games went to UCO, and especially this year, they're all going to be there. The 8-man had been at neutral sites. I think it's going to be fantastic, and it'll be 2 great weeks of high school basketball. Monday, I think it starts up Tuesday through Saturday. Take a day off, and then we go Monday through Saturday. And all the games will be played at the Big House except for one night. I think the semifinals for a class or two will be on that Friday night before the state championship. But I think it's going to be fantastic. There's going to be games. I mean, you can get in and watch a whole bunch of basketball games. You can watch them on the network, however you want to take it in. It is a lot of basketball, and it'll be interesting. Growing up, it was always 5A, 6A basketball for me. But now getting to do the state basketball tournaments, I've been assigned mostly to the Big House, and I've learned so much more about all the great teams and coaches and players throughout the entire state of Oklahoma. And I've really enjoyed the smaller classes, but now we kind of get everything that we want. If you're a big school guy or a small school guy, if you're Lakiva Sickles and Howe, if you love that basketball, but you've never seen Sapulpa girls play basketball, well, hang out in the afternoon or come back the next day and check it out. You can kind of see the different variety of the way the game is played, and it is played different. So I think it's going to be fantastic. I think we'll have great crowds. I'll be interested in how the 6A, 5A athletes, coaches, and players like playing in the State Fair Arena. Like you said, they're used to OU and the Maybe Center. But for 1 year, and then new building, just drove by it last Sunday. You can start to really starting to see it fill out. And I was really hoping those construction workers were going a little bit faster than we thought in the last couple of months, that we can maybe get in there. But sounds like you got one more season in the Big House before we transition over next door.
Well, yeah, and I'll tell you, just because of the position that you've had, and I've kind of filled in on a couple of these finals where I wasn't really covering a team and we were producing for the NFHS, and it's just kind of fun. I mean, we get the best seats in the house. I mean, and it's just game after game, and I really love it when we were at OU or at Tulsa. It was kind of like, okay, next one up. I mean, that one was good, and so you're a spectator to all of these, and so we've got a really good position, and I don't ever take that for granted, but.
No doubt.
Chris Evans from the Guthrie News. And I'll tell you what, I thank you for coming on and allowing me to have a little bit of podcast time with you, because I know you're really busy. You got the Guthrie news page to take care of, and then you got all of your stuff and the teams that you cover, and you have your own little podcast and reviews and all the rest of that stuff. So I want to have you as a continued guest, because your knowledge of the state and the sports are good, and that's what podcasting is all about, giving people out there to hear a little bit about from our vantage point and what we have to bring as well.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate everything that you have helped me with on the network side of things. And it's not just football, it's not just basketball, but a lot of help with baseball as well. It's really cool to see what you've turned Oklahoma Sports Network into over the years. Keep adding more teams, and a friend of mine, Michael, is doing night games. He's been looking, and you gave him the opportunity. So he was mad because Carl Albert took it to Ike 70-0. And I was like, hey, I watched to the very end. You never know who's watching or listening. I watched to the very, very last second. But it's great to see what Oklahoma Sports Network has turned into over the last couple of years. I know and it's fun just to dial in on Friday night, but I can imagine how much work behind the scenes. I hope a lot of people respect that, because I follow one school throughout and that's enough for me. And I can imagine your schedule throughout the week and getting everything signed up. And it happens in the summertime. It just doesn't happen during football season. But kudos to you and your entire staff.
Well, thank you. And it really is. It is a team and community effort. I mean, I have a lot of great people that work for us and kind of put this together and trusting in them. As you know, I'm doing a broadcast as well as, 12 other or 11 other schools at the same time are. And, to get that launched and get that, done and still adding schools. Jones was our latest school, and boy, just where they left off and then they just took off. And that Bethany game was back and forth. That was a thrill. And I know that's not a class size that, they were having to play up. So, they didn't shy away from that. So I'm looking forward to their run, and then still in negotiations with talking about maybe adding 2 or 3 more schools next year. So, yeah, I mean, I love it. I love the fact that I love one thing, and I'll leave it at this, is when I get to play a Thursday game for the crew that I follow, and all the rest are playing Friday, I go to my house and I have 4 TVs on and my phone, and I'm just kind of going around and watching all that together. And I said, that really is neat. And I try to emphasize to people that we're not just a website. Yes, we are a website, but we're an app as well. So you can go to Apple and Android devices, download there. We're also in people's homes, over 28,000 television sets in homes on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV. So, we're just a click away, and you get spoiled that you can watch all of our teams just by clicking out and clicking back in, as opposed to trying to bail out of that and trying to find a search and find on a Safari search of, well, are they on a YouTube page or a Facebook, or where do I find them? And the school doesn't list it. So I think there's a little bit of an advantage, and I rightfully so, and I'll do my own plug of being on the Oklahoma Sports Network.
Well, I know a lot of fans appreciate that, because there's a lot of grandmas and grandpas that don't live in the state, aunts and uncles that live out of state. They can check that out. But also, I would, for all the great people of Oklahoma Sports Network watching this, also when Eric and his crew play all those commercials, you got to go thank them for sponsoring, because they allow Eric to get all this equipment and all the talent for when Altus has to drive 3 hours to Guthrie and stuff like that. You got to thank those sponsors. So there's a lot of big sponsors or big companies across the U.S. that big box tops, but that don't sponsor. So it's always those sponsors, those restaurants and those little shops that allow things to happen. So a big thank you to all the great sponsors.
Well, and thank you. I mean, because we couldn't really do it without them, and the same thing. I mean, it takes that, and we don't have a subscription based, and hopefully, we always say it's free to download and free to watch, as long as we can get that support. And we've been very fortunate. This is our 9th season now to do that. So, Chris, you're going to be kind of a regular guest for me if I can pick on you as much as I do, and I appreciate your time and appreciate what you guys do. You guys do a phenomenal job, and get to watch Guthrie a little bit, and you're on the other side, but I get to. That Carl Albert Guthrie game was one. I know not to your liking last year at the Rock, but that was a good one. That's one of those instant classics that you can get between those two. So you can catch that as well. Well, Chris, thank you very much for your willingness to be on my 11th. I haven't really done this a lot. My 11th episode of podcasting.
No, glad to do it, and have a great games this week, and have a fun season. And I'm sure we will catch up many times this football season.
Yep, and we'll see you probably at the end of it when it all comes to the finals there at UCO. So that is this edition of The Point After on the Oklahoma Sports Network. Already told you, free to download, free to watch. Just download on Apple and Android devices. Catch us on all of our social media as well. From Facebook, like us there, follow us there, to Instagram, to X, and YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You've been watching a presentation of the Oklahoma Sports Network, The Point After on OSN.